Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I guess actually this way for me is Mr. Lorcan Mc Auliffe, Mr. Gay Ireland, who is our guest speaker tonight. Lorcan is going to be, he's our very first speaker for alternative MoSessions or MoTalks, which are going to be dealing with issues that are affecting UL students, but that are kind of being swept under the radar because they're affecting the minority of students, and so the majority just seem to overlook them. And so today Lorcan's going to talk a bit about homophobia and transphobia and the effect and the impact that's having on younger generations. But yeah, I guess Lorcan, you have the title Mr. Gay Ireland. Start off with that, I guess. Tell us a bit about how you got there.
I suppose it all happened last year, so 2019. I would have gone to Limerick Pride. I suppose I would have been chatting to my friends kind of around the time, and it was kind of where I found that became really comfortable in my sexuality and who I was, and kind of getting that confidence in myself. And they were kind of saying, why don't you go for Mr. Gay Limerick, which was at the time hosted during Limerick Pride, which was in July. So went for that. I suppose it was kind of made up of 3 rounds. The first one was kind of, it was like getting to know your personality, I suppose, kind of, what's they call it, informal. Then you had the beach wear round. That was great crack. I have to say, Carried Away was the host on the night, and she really knew how to kind of keep everyone going. And then you had the formal rounds. So what could you bring to the table as Mr. Gay Limerick? What would you do? So kind of I took the stance of mental health and promotion of mental health and well-being. And kind of from there, that night then, when they were said, yep, you are now the new Mr. Gay Limerick, we kind of started work there and going to Ireland. So we started with the campaign for the HSE. I suppose it's a HSE online course. It's the inclusion and awareness, LGBT inclusion and awareness, the basics. It's kind of the start of their LGBT courses. So I spoke with UL, actually was the first college to introduce this as part of their thing, as part of their course. So they brought in this course to all nurses that are coming up through the college now need to do this course. It only takes 40 minutes, it doesn't cost anything, but it makes a massive difference if you're maybe, kind of worried about working with people who identify as LGBTQIA+. Because in that course, it also shows the kind of like attitudes of nurses that they don't want to offend people. They felt nervous about certain things. So that course, I think, will be a great benefit down the line for the new kind of era of nurses coming up through it, that they'll have an understanding of pronouns, they'll have an understanding of language, how to address certain situations. So I suppose that was a great start in UL. So that was July, kind of working all the way through. Then kind of flash forward to December, we'd started fundraisers. So we'd put on a drag show in 101 in Limerick. So yeah, Stephen's down there because he's just like, yeah, support 101. So they were exceptionally good along kind of Sophie Latouche. We worked together to develop fundraiser in aid of GOSH in Limerick, which is gender orientation, sexual health and HIV. So the way it worked was that event was planned for the 8th of December in Limerick. I got the call saying we're actually having the interviews for Mr. Gay Ireland that day. So I zoomed up to Dublin that morning, sat down with Brian Merriman, who is the founder, and other members of his committee, which can be made up of a lot of the Dublin Gay Theatre Festival would be kind of the volunteers that are involved in it. There's amazing sport in it. So I went up for that interview that morning. I suppose it used to kind of be a big show, but that has changed in past kind of few years, I suppose. So this year we sat down, we had an interview, and it was actually a lovely way of doing it because they got to know you personally rather than on a stage, and they knew the person they were going for. So we sat down, we talked about, again, kind of what do you think the issues are in the community at the moment, what do you think you could bring to the table, kind of will you advocate for the community? So we went through that. And then that night, I think I was very clever of Lisa Daly, who's the chairperson for Limerick Pride. So they all kind of Zoomed together for the event that night. So I zoomed back down, came to the event, didn't know anything. Brian had rang Lisa, who was at the event that night, to announce it because it would have been like when my family was there. So that night is when they announced I'd won. I knew nothing about it. Everyone else at the show knew. And they announced it. So that's where it came from. So now it's working on Europe and the worlds at the moment.
Very good.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the title, by the way. I mean, I'm sure you had quite a bit of competition for it, so well done. I guess then, if you want to talk, I know we kind of did just speak about it a few minutes ago, but I wasn't recording that. So if you want to talk a little bit about like your journey with mental health and how that brought you into nursing a bit, just how that where you are today with that.
Yeah, I suppose so. For anyone that kind of wants to know a bit of background to me myself, I went to UL for the last 4 years. I just graduated this year as a mental health nurse. As I kind of said to you, the interest all came from kind of watching, being younger, and kind of seeing, okay, this is how society is going at the moment. The complexity of mental health, with physical health, as I was saying to you, you can kind of walk in, get tests, and more than likely they will find out, okay, this is wrong, this is the treatment, or there's kind of a definite answer. With mental health, it's a lot more complex. You're looking at the biological, the psychological, and the sociological of every person, and the complex needs of how do I find the correct balance of each and ensure that all are working at an optimal level. So I found that very interesting. So I kind of suppose floated into it, made it through 4 years of it, and now graduating and working. So yeah.
Okay, very cool. Um, I guess then, yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty of why you're here today. Homophobia and transphobia is a unfortunate, but it's a major issue that is in the LGBT community. So tell us a little bit about like what is homophobia and what is transphobia. I guess is a good way to start.
Yeah, I think always got to start with the definition so people know what we're talking about in the start. So I'm going to take this. I found this one was probably the best description of as a whole. Homophobia refers to negative, fearful, or harmful attitudes or behavior towards LGBTQIA plus people. It includes prejudice, harassment, discrimination, or acts of violence. That would be homophobia. Transphobia then refers to the same kind of negative, fearful, or hateful attitudes or behaviors towards a member of the transgender or transsexual community. Now, it is important to highlight, just while we are on this point, that although the word homophobia encompasses the negative attitudes towards a range of sexual orientations and genders of each group within the LGBTQIA plus community, that each of the members of them communities, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, they each have kind of a minority stress we need to kind of highlight there as well. One example I will give would be the bisexual community struggling with biphobia, which, like, an example of that would be that their sexuality can be invalidated by people, and people can say, oh, that doesn't exist. That would be one massive form of biphobia. So kind of just important to highlight, there's also aphobia, which would be in terms of the asexual community. So just important to highlight that, although I won't be talking about them in detail in this, that we do recognize that they are there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess everything has its own form of prejudice and discrimination, and yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Is there, so you said there that homophobia is, sorry, I'm just curious myself now, but you said homophobia is a bit of a catch-all term, but it's more for gay men. Is there a specific umbrella term then that actually encompasses them all?
This is what we were I was looking at today, because I was just like, okay, homophobia is the word that's always used, and it's used as the umbrella term in general, kind of like if you're talking about kind of, oh, that was homophobic, it kind of encompasses a lot of the community, but we need to understand that a lot of people kind of want that respect of knowing that they have, like, every single letter means something. So LGBTQ, I think there's two Qs. There's the letters. They kind of, there is a lot of them at the moment, in terms of it's get bigger and bigger and broader, which is fantastic because it gives everyone a visibility. which I suppose is the important thing within our community is the visibility of it. So with each of them, they all kind of have their own specific phobia, but homophobia is usually the term used in a general kind of the general terms. But
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
And I guess, do you know if what's kind of like the major you were saying there that like it's any kind of like negative
Mhm.
abuse, be it like physical, mental, or like have you ever had any interactions with homophobia or encounter?
Personally, I think I've been asked this question quite a lot, and it's one that I'm more asked in private than I am more in chat, but I'm very open to talking about it. I can honestly say I've experienced very little in my time of being out. I suppose my issue at the start was more accepting myself and the fear of other people not accepting you, but it's that acceptance of yourself that I think is one of the bigger fears um, within in the community itself when you are kind of thinking about it. But in terms of homophobia, once or twice maybe a comment was passed, kind of, like you should be ashamed of yourself. I would have experienced kind of, I suppose, homophobic bullying quite regularly growing up, um, going to school, which it would be. I wasn't out at the time, so I suppose that's where it came. Actually, yeah, I suppose it's the point to make on it. I didn't know until quite late on, even though I was quite a flamboyant kind of like teenager student. I didn't know until quite late on. I think it was like 19 before I started to understand, okay, there is something really different here. With my, my sexual orientation, I wasn't becoming as attracted to girls as I was when I was younger. So I kind of like denied it to myself, I suppose, all through my school years. Therefore, when the bullying did happen, it kind of affected me quite badly. Of like, I was like, why do people keep saying this? And then denying it yourself, which makes it even harder when it actually does come down to it, then to accept it. Um, so it would have been like, even though I was kind of classifying myself as straight going to school and, interested in women, and that bullying was still there. I suppose that's where I experienced most of the homophobia was before I came out. Homophobic comments, it's like that harassment growing up, which kind of later on in the chat when we get to it, I kind of have some of the reports and kind of what students are saying now as well. So
Okay. Do you think then that having those homophobic remarks when you were younger led to the reason of you having like a late realization or a late blossoming? Like, were you subconsciously denying it the whole time, do you think? Or, and like, because I assume that would be quite a common thing for a lot of people, would be that
yeah,
like homophobia would delay you coming out.
absolutely. I personally, my own experience, I think so. Yeah, I think because I had been like, this was coming at me from all angles. I was denying it so much. I think subconsciously, I completely just obliterated it in my own head. I was like, don't think about it. Um, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Until that point where I went to college and I was like, okay, I'm not getting this abuse all the time. I had time to explore who I was. I suppose that self-realization and getting to know yourself kind of happened at that point. So yeah, that's kind of where it started. So yeah, to answer your question, I do think subconsciously I did make a conscious decision to be like, no, I don't want to be this person. I just think it became a protection mechanism nearly from my own body to be like, no, deny it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, never been happier now since kind of got that self-actualization and realized, okay, this is who you are, and kind of coming to terms with that, I suppose.
Okay, very good. Okay, so do you think, and I know you said now that you've had very little interactions with homophobia since you've come out, but do you think that now that you're more sure of yourself and confident in who you are, would homophobia still phase you as much? Like, would it still have the
Um,
same effect?
I suppose that's a really good question in terms of obviously it's never a nice thing to experience it, and I would hate to have see it happening to anyone in our community because it is a horrible feeling to be discriminated against for being the person that you are. um would it bother me? Yes, it would. I suppose irritate me, but I'd be more likely to stand up to myself for myself and be like, "That's not okay. It's not acceptable." You know, it's not acceptable to judge someone or harass someone based on their life and who they are, their identity. Would it affect? I suppose that fear is still there. Every so often, you do hear of kind of like the attacks happening, even here in Limerick. It would have happened after a night out. A friend of ours would have been attacked for being gay. There was no motive for the thing. There was no motive apart from his sexuality and him identifying as gay. And he would have been attacked and assaulted. And I think that's a fear that a lot of our community may live in, is that, like, walking down the street after a night out, are you safe? You know, so yeah, that would be it. Other than that, kind of, I think, no, now that I have kind of like my own self assurance and awareness, I'd be kind of stand up to it, you know?
Yeah. That's very good. It's nice that you have that confidence, and I'm sure a lot of people. Well, I don't know the statistics. You are the man with the statistics, but I'm sure quite a lot of people wouldn't have it. So it's nice that some people can. I guess, yeah. Let's kick off anyway with your
Perfect.
statistics and the kind of research that you've done a bit on this.
Perfect. I suppose just to kind of highlight where I'm going to be going with it, kind of the aim. So I'm going to chat briefly about kind of prevalence. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is statistics to give a kind of a picture of kind of what people are experiencing. Um, I suppose myself, yourself, we'll probably have a little chat, kind of what we think, what effect would it have, would homophobia or transphobia have on someone. And then I'm going to move on to just like 2 or 3 reports. I am well aware that there is a lot of them. We just do not have the time to cover them all. So I've briefly taken just a few points from each, and I'll just mention them just to make sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the effect. So before I went and looked at this, I was like, okay, before I looked at any studies, I was like, what effects does homophobia or transphobia have on a person? And I kind of went through it in my own head. So kind of I broke it up into 3 again. I looked at physically, mentally, and socially, and the link between them 3. I suppose if someone experienced a physical assault due to their gender or their sexual orientation, what effect does that have on their mental health? So they're physically assaulted, so they're physically hurt. Mental health is affected due to, I suppose, the assault happening and that fear of it happening again, and increased anxiety, I suppose self-esteem knocked. And then you're going to the social thing. Do they start to socially isolate themselves? Are they afraid to go on nights out? So I looked at that link, I suppose, between it and the effect that, although one part of the harassment or the homophobia is, we'll say, physical, there's also the other 2 sides and many other complex, I suppose, connections between physical, sociological, and mental, health wise. So other things, I was thinking, like, it makes it harder for people to come out, because if they're afraid of being judged or rejected or, you know, isolated from the community, kind of it prevents them coming out, which can lead to mental health problems down the road. Kind of the suppression of it is, you know, suppressing who you are, and kind of, I suppose, anger and just being upset and not being really, you know, not being the true self that you want to be, and not being able to be that person. You know, like a lot of the LGBT Ireland report that I'm going to discuss, the main thing that kind of says is the increased mental health issues due to the increased levels of bullying that people experience when they're part of the community. So yeah, I suppose kind of moving on to that, the reports that I've kind of looked at, or the publications that I've looked at for this, is they give us an insight into the prevalence and the effects that homophobia and transphobia have on the community, or have on our community. So I'll be looking at the LGBT Ireland report, which was published in 2016. The Belong to Youth Service 2019 school climate survey, and the STOD campaign, which was Stop Transphobia and Discrimination, which was brought out by the Transgender Equality Network Ireland, Ireland, and Equality for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex people in Europe in 2013. Just to mention here, I saw it today. It was my first time seeing it. So this will be my next kind of reading is new, which came out in 2020, which was brought up by the Transgender Equality Network and UL. They brought out the post-primary school experiences of transgender and gender diverse youth in Ireland. So that is going to be another one. I suppose if anyone out there is looking for kind of newer kind of studies that are coming out, these are all phenomenal studies in their field. They give an insight, which I'm looking forward to kind of reading the newer one now that it is. So can I start with the LGBT Ireland report?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. Take it whichever direction you want to go.
Perfect. So just start with that. So it came out in 2016. It was commissioned by the Gay and Lesbian Equality Network and belonged to Youth Services. It was funded by the HSE's National Office for Suicide Prevention, and it was led by Professor Agnes Higgins in Dublin. So it was broken into two modules. It was broken into Module 1, which looked at the LGBT lives, and it was an online survey which had about 2,264 participants in it. So that looked at their lives. Module 2 looked at the attitudes of the attitudes towards LGBTI people from the general population. This was a telephone survey, and about 1,008 people between the ages of 18 and 65 took part in that part. So the key findings of this, to point out the next three facts I'm about to give, are not just down to homophobia alone and bullying, harassment. They also can be with, as kind of I briefly mentioned earlier, kind of getting to know, when you're coming out, your self-acceptance. There's many other issues that feed into the next three, like statistics and facts, I suppose, rather than just homophobia. So it found that people within the LGBT community were had twice the level of self-harm, 3 times the levels of attempted suicide, and 4 times the level of severe or extremely severe stress, anxiety, or depression in comparison to the general population, which is quite startling. And, I suppose we see all the time people saying, oh, we're getting so good at acceptance of the community. Okay, we're on the start of the ladder, like the marriage equality, when that came in, that was the start of a ladder. We have a long way to go in terms of that. Looking at them statistics there, 2016, that's 4 years ago. Like 4 times, it's like 4 times the level of kind of severe depression and anxiety is crazy. Like for every one person that has a general population, 4 people, you're looking at, it's quite a big significant jump. Then I suppose it found that students that experienced LGBTI bullying in school had higher levels of depression, anxiety, and alcohol use was actually highlighted there as well. And they were more likely to self-harm and seriously consider ending their life. I suppose that is one of the main things that pops up a lot in this, kind of the mental health effect of homophobia and bullying, and how the increased level of suicidal thoughts with intention, which is quite an important word to use. It's that intention there that they do want to do it, and they're quite serious attempts. When you look at, if you get a chance to look at the report, it gives the breakdown of how many had suicidal thoughts, but how many wanted to attempt it, is the next thing, which is quite high. 1 in 4 people were missing school due to bullying, and transgender and intersex had higher rates of feeling like they did not belong in school than their gay and lesbian counterparts. I suppose they had that feeling of kind of non-acceptance by their peers. I suppose there's many reasons for that, and I suppose I won't get into them today, but there is many reasons. I suppose that they have a kind of like, it's nearly, if someone's transgender, that education needs to be provided within schools to explain, what is transgender, who kind of, I suppose that education needs to be provided in terms of transgender, you see it all the time. Like gay and lesbian is, as they say, more widely accepted, which shouldn't be the case. Every single person should have that chance for equality and the same respect as everyone else in the community. So I'm going to flick through here. So experiences of homophobia. So 67% of people who took part in this had witnessed bullying of LGBTI students in their school. 50% of LGBTI students personally experienced bullying. 1 in 4, as I say, missed or skipped school. And then 1 in 4 considered leaving school early. And approximately 1 in 20 just quit school altogether due to harassment and bullying. So a few other statistics, I suppose, that came up in this was 1 in 3 gay men have been punched, hit, or physically attacked in public. 1 in 4 transgender or intersex people have been punched or physically attacked in public. 1 in 3 transgender or intersex have had hurtful things written about them on social media. And 1 in 4 intersex people and 1 in 5 transgender people have experienced sexual violence. So, kind of there's a lot in that. I suppose it mentions transphobia on another little level as well here, that they have additional challenges in day-to-day lives. So 60% have had the wrong pronouns used when referring to their gender, and only 40% felt safe expressing their gender identity in public, with 1 in 10 of those saying that they would never do it. And then just coming back to the HSC report, just the one thing on transphobia there was 74% of transgender people had negative experiences within our own healthcare system. So I think that's the importance of education there, as I kind of mentioned earlier.
That's quite some shocking statistics there.
Yeah.
There's one thing there that I kind of, well, there's a few things you were talking about there that kind of stood out. And it's the kind of the difference in the timeline of acceptance between the more widely accepted, and I don't want to say widely accepted, it's the wrong term, but like the general gay and lesbian and bi population are generally much more accepted and understood now than the trans population. And it's kind of interesting that, like, while they're all part of the same community, and I know that they each have their own individual uniquenesses, but they're all part of the same community, but they're all still experiencing things at different timelines. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
I suppose that's, I am very conscious of the way I kind of phrase things. I suppose it's very important that the way I say something, I don't belittle one community or everything. I'm very kind of equality with all of them.
Yeah.
But it is that it is, I suppose, fair to say that as a general rule that kind of the gay and lesbian communities have, I suppose, are that bit further ahead in terms of acceptance, which absolutely should not be the case, as kind of said before. But it is, you can see it then reflected in statistics, that transgender people and intersex people, that their rates of, we'll say, attempted suicide are actually higher. I don't have them here on me right now from that report, but there is a breakdown of that within that report. And it shows the effect of even kind of like how much more bullying they experience, and I suppose the acceptance as well. So it is quite important to highlight that there is a lot of minority stress within each group of the community, I suppose.
Do you think there's a particular reason for that discrepancy in acceptance? Like, is it an education thing, like a not like ignorance, not understanding the differences, or is there something
That
else?
definitely plays a part. I think kind of like education is always going to be a very important part in, I suppose, moving our community forward, and um, that. But I think other things that would play a role is, like, you look at television programs. Are people being equally represented within them? There's a fantastic series on Netflix at the moment called Pose. It looks back at kind of the days of ballroom, kind of when the HIV pandemic would have been quite, or I think pandemic would have been quite its prime, I suppose, and quite prominent within the community. It looks at that, and it looks at the experience of, I suppose, transgender people, gay people, and it gives an insight, I suppose, into the whole the whole spectrum, I suppose, of things that were experienced by the community.
Okay. Another thing there as well is, like all these statistics were of school. Well, the majority of them were about
Mm.
school kids, and so it's kind of terrifying that it's happening so young. And I mean, I totally know I've seen it myself, that it happens. But was there kind of statistics at what age kind of homophobic and transphobic bullying begins? Because as a children aren't born bullies. You're kind of it's a
Yeah.
learned behavior. So is there kind of a time when you think it becomes prevalent?
Well, I know the statistics for kind of when people kind of start to understand their own sexual identity, so would be the age of 12.
Okay.
So really from that age, I suppose you're starting to kind of grow into the person you are, and kind of people are starting to see, oh, okay, there's that person, they're gay, or even though they may have not come out, people tend to target. I don't have the statistic on me of when that would start, but I really do think, like, I remember from quite a young age, as in like probably first class of primary school, being bullied. So it's hard to put a number on it. I suppose I remember being quite young, being bullied, um, as homophobically, yeah. So, yeah, I don't think it has an age anymore. I think it starts, but I'd be hoping to kind of work towards, the homophobic bullying just being ruled out of, like, it's just like people using words that shouldn't be used, and
Yeah. I suppose it's a unique case. Everyone's gonna no one's gonna get bullied at any particular age.
Mm,
It can start at any particular age. So I guess it's
yeah,
a very hard question to kind of answer. But if you were saying there that like one of the main ages is 12 years old, when people kind of figure that out, that's
yeah,
kind of an awkward enough time as
mm,
well, because people are going from primary to secondary,
yeah.
so you have quite enough of a change going on there. You're meeting new people. You probably left quite a good few people behind, so it's a sucky time for that really to be happening.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And kind of, as you say, moving to secondary kind of level, um, it's just like, you know, people can question. They're like, right, if I come out now, am I going to be accepted within my new school? Am I going to make friends? Am I going to be isolated? Is no one going to talk to me? I suppose all them fears are something that comes at that age. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's quite a tough time, I suppose.
Okay. Another thing that you mentioned there, that's quite, you know, it wasn't so much a thing like in the last few years, but now I see it becoming more and more prevalent. Even Simon has it there in his own name, is pronouns and the more active use of them
Mm.
and misusing them. And so is that quite a common um, area of homophobia, and I guess more so transphobia, is misusing pronouns.
Yes, it
Um,
would be. Absolutely. I think it's very important. The biggest thing I suppose I will put across today, and I have this in the recommendations at the end, would be, do not assume someone's pronouns based on how they look, how they sound. You should never presume some number one identity or sexual orientation off of just meeting them. But also don't assume that you know, they use he, him, or she, her. It's very important to ask a person, um, if you are working with them, what would you like to be identify as, what pronouns do you use, what would you like. I suppose the important thing, if I work with anyone within the community, from a mental health point of view, and I'm working with them professionally, I always ask, one of the first questions is, what would you like me to call you, how would you like me to address you? I suppose it's always the important thing, because I'm showing that respect, that I understand that, yes, I understand that you want to be um, identify as a man or a woman, or whatever sexuality they are, and how they would like to be I suppose. Just when we are talking, how would they like me to address them, which is very, very important.
Okay. And I guess just you have the typical he, him, she, her, and then you have they, them. And
Okay.
they, them is more so used by the non-binary community.
Yeah.
So maybe just as you were saying, definitions are so important in these kind of conversations. You want to kind of give a bit of a definition of the non-binary community, and just in case anyone doesn't know.
Okay. So when you talk about non-binary, I suppose you're looking at a um
No.
sorry, I just got a drink of water. You're looking at someone that kind of identifies the gender outside the gender of male and female. I suppose the very important part there. How would I put a definition on it? A clear definition? For those that may be kind of wondering. I have it here actually in my PowerPoint, and kind of have to put, because there's so much to kind of have. I kind of put it all on a PowerPoint beside me if you see me looking this way. So definition of non-binary would be a person who identifies, as I said, with a gender outside of the male-female gender, such as an agender person. So they don't identify as either male or female, or gender neutral rather than a specific male or female would be the technical definition of it. So, it's important, as you say, to kind of highlight all of them that way.
Okay. And I guess kind of going forward then, like you've made the case that these issues rather, are quite prevalent still, unfortunately. And even though we're becoming more accepting of them, of the LGBT community, these issues are still there and we still see them today. So what can people kind of proactively do to mitigate the effects or to stop it if they see it, or to be a bit more subconscious in their own ways? Because I totally understand that mislabeling someone, mispronouncing someone. I don't know what the actual term is there, but using the wrong pronouns for someone based on their appearance would be something that I'd fall quite common to. Especially if they don't immediately present themselves as being part of the LGBT community.
Yes.
So, what are some things that we might be able to go about in our daily life doing to just mitigate that?
So I suppose as yourself working within a community or working within a workplace, make it known that homophobic like innuendos, that jokes, that they're just unacceptable around you. You don't want to hear them, or within, make that importance of they should not be used. I suppose develop guidelines within a workplace that this kind of harassment isn't acceptable, and what are the kind of, if you can within your workplace, of course, working with your manager or whatever, what would be the repercussions to someone that did go against these rules or did harass someone or was subjecting someone to homophobic or transphobic bullying. I suppose within the schools, a classroom discussion maybe, kind of, education on different sexualities, orientation, sexual orientation, gender would be quite important. And then obviously be supportive, be an ally. If you aren't a part of the LGBT community itself, that you are an ally to them. And then, be as, if you are part of the community, be as proud of yourself as you can be, because you're you, being unapologetically you. No one's going to do you better than yourself. So yeah.
Okay. And I guess what kind of, you were saying there earlier on towards it that homophobic remarks might have hindered your own realization or acceptance of yourself. What kind of comments would you give to anyone who would be a bit younger, or do you know what, even a bit older? There's people of all ages who are still in the closet for, haven't accepted themselves quite yet. What kind of advice would you give to those people who still are suffering from homophobia or are fearful of it?
I suppose it's very hard to give advice on that because everyone's journey is different. Everyone's acceptance is different, but I would say spend that time getting to know yourself. And know who you are is beautiful. It is perfectly okay to be who you are. It is perfect. Like, people will embrace you for who you are. I know that fear is there. I suppose I grew up in the countryside. It was that fear was like, will I be rejected by my community, or that kind of, I suppose, that fear of, but it does get better, whether you know not everyone is going to accept you. That is an important thing to understand. But the thing is, there you have such amazing sports. You will have an amazing community that will stand by you. You will make friends. You will make, yeah, as I say, kind of like friends of the family you choose for yourself. Your new family that like sport. I was lucky enough to have an amazingly supportive family. And even the small community village at home was quite embracing of the whole thing. So just, I suppose, spending that time with yourself, getting to know yourself, and coming to accept yourself. Once you've accepted yourself, I think it gets a whole lot easier, because you're like, okay, I accept myself. I am who I am, and I'm going to live my life how I am, no matter what people are going to say. I suppose, to combat that,
Yeah.
So yeah, and just to put in there, just as we're finishing up here, if there is anyone that kind of needs, I suppose, support at this time, or just in general, there is a few kind of helplines. I suppose you have the LGBT helpline, they belong to youth services, the Transgender Equality Network. These are all fantastic websites just to pop onto. The LGBT helpline is 1890 929 539. So that's the number, but the other ones will be online. If you are looking for them, they will provide support to you,
Very good. Very good. I guess, do you have any other remarks you'd like to make?
No, I think that's everything. I think it was kind of the important, and I know with COVID at the moment, things have become a lot more stressful for our community. Some members are living in, I suppose, they're isolated at home. They don't have kind of events to go to, but they also may be, I suppose, subject to homophobia within their own household. And I suppose due to COVID, they can't really leave it. They don't have that little break. So know that there is support out there. There's the HSE have launched helplines. Please avail of them. I suppose even if people want to contact and talk, my Instagram is there, Mr. Gay Ireland Official, or Facebook. They're all there if kind of need advice or support, I suppose, of where to go.
Very good, very good.
And thank you very much for having me. It's been a great little chat now, and thank you for, I suppose, shining a light on it.
Thank you for coming. That's been really enlightening, and I do hope that that this will get seen by a good few people, and the people who need to see it will see it. So thank you for coming. I guess, does anyone have any questions for Lorcan before we sign off?
I've opened up the floor to the lads. I've tried to unmute all of them, but it's up to the lads now to accept it.
Perfect.
And apologies again, lads, for I had to cut off there at 2 different stages over the course of the thing, so apologies. I didn't mean to annoy or offend anyone, but yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Stephen.
I wonder if any of the reports that you read, was there any breakdown of how that kind of impact on LGBT plus people spreads across different groups? So would people of color, were they kind of analyzed separately, or?
No, they wouldn't have been. I suppose it was the community as a whole. Was the LGBT Ireland report would probably one of the more comprehensive ones. It would have been kind of the leading one at the moment in its field, which would be a fantastic document to look at if you are looking at it. It's 312 pages, I'm going to say, if not a bit more. But there is the key findings thing as well, if you don't have the full time to read that. It done kind of a breakdown, I suppose, of the different groups within the lesbian, gay, transgender, intersex community, and there is a breakdown of that at points of the different effects it had on someone, because it does. I know when they were doing the kind of survey on it, they asked people to I suppose identify their gender and their sexual orientation, so they can put together kind of, I suppose, the percentages for each of those groups within it, which is quite interesting to see the difference between, we'll say, someone who is gay and someone who identifies as intersex. The difference in percentages for, we'll say, maybe attempted suicide rates or attempted self-harm, that kind of, so that would be the one I'd suggest. As I said, I mentioned a few of the other ones there. The 10-hour report, which would be the Transgender Equality Network, as a 2009 report, I think, as well. But they have updated certain bits. They have other publications there. They'd be really amazing ones to look at as well.
Yeah, it's just such a complex issue that, like, with mental health and like with these kind of societal things like homophobia, transphobia, and all those kind of various things, like the way they interact as well, like it just gets really complicated. So I was just wondering, like, if that's kind of been looked at, because even between things like being intersex and gay together, like how do they fit into the big picture? Because I imagine that they wouldn't just, fall into the kind of the gay sphere or the intersex sphere, because they're both. So
absolutely,
there's probably a lot we're missing there as well. If that hasn't,
there is, and even there, I didn't even mention, we'll say, homophobia and transphobia within the community itself. It's not just the general population that are kind of subjecting the community to homophobia. You have people who identify as gay who will be transphobic towards someone who's transgender and make rude remarks. It's not just the general population we're talking about here as well. It's even within our own community, these issues are there. But it is, again, where do people fit in? I think it is very important. People say, why do we need all, the letters, the LGBTQIAA plus? It's so important to have it, because it shows that we visibly see each and every person in them groups, that they are not just being umbrella termed into gay or lesbian or, so it is, as you say, it's that kind of overlap of where do they fit in, where do we go with that,
Okay. Anyone else before we wish Lorcan the best of luck with his Mr. Gay International? Or is it Mr. Gay World?
The world's in Europe now next year, so we'll see.
Okay. Well, best of luck with that. I'm sure you'll have no bother winning them. But yeah, I'd say break a leg, but don't. But yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you to everyone else in the audience.